I guess you got to ask right away, what's next for Russell Wilson?
Oh, man.
What the hell is next for this guy? Because, Dan Beyer, if you remember, the whole narrative was, well, when he left the Seahawks, there's teams that are one player away or a quarterback away from getting there. That's not the story anymore. He's not this $50 million a year guy, but he's also not a backup in my mind.
I'm going to give you guys a name. You ready for this? Mitchell Trubisky. And why do I bring up Mitchell Trubisky? And it's not because Russell Wilson could go to Pittsburgh, but Mitchell Trubisky spent a year in Buffalo. Didn't play at all. Was the backup to Josh Allen, but got away from all of the craziness that was in Chicago. And just spent a year in Buffalo as the backup quarterback there. And somehow everyone felt, wow, Mitchell Trubisky spends a year as Josh Allen's understudy. He's ready for another starting gig. And then he went and played for the Steelers and was the same old Mitchell Trubisky as before. The point is we look at Russell Wilson now as being awful. So maybe the best thing for Russell Wilson would be to just go somewhere and maybe be a backup? Not play.
I'm not saying he's a star, but when you see like Colin do those stars compared to other stars, and he does a little breakdown of numbers and those blind comparisons, it's not like Russ had an awful year last year.
No, but the perception is that he's awful. And that is what I think is going to hamper him, where maybe not in the front office, but if you're a Steelers fan, do you really want Russell Wilson? If you're a Falcons fan, do you really want Russell Wilson? And I'm not trying to say that Russell Wilson is Mitchell Trubisky, but it's just funny on how sometimes guys just go away for a little bit and you kind of forget what they were. But Wilson is still so new and fresh, even though he got benched, that there's this little there doesn't exude excitement over him. And that's the tricky part.
Jay Stewart, is there a team that you think would be like pumped, where the fan base would be like, we got him, we got Russell Wilson? Like I don't see a fan base being super pumped about it, but he's definitely an upgrade for some teams.
It certainly looks like it. I mean, the Steelers have been the team that seems to be out there, but if you think about it, there were a couple complete dog crap quarterbacks for teams last year, namely the Raiders. Like anything would be like an upgrade from that. I can't imagine him sitting out. But what Russell Wilson needs to address, I think, is between his ears, because he still thinks he's a top 5 quarterback. If he could get to the point where he can, what's the word? Resign to the fact that he's kind of a mid to lower level quarterback and play from that space in his head.
The whole vibe of when he went to Denver. Before Sean Payton showed up, he had his own office. People were saying he didn't connect to the other guys on the team. And everything, his cringy videos he puts out there. I think if Russ is a little more in the background, it's better for him. But oddly enough, being a quarterback in the NFL is not much different than being a radio host, except for the money. Because when you think about it, there's only so many spots. There's only so many starting quarterback spots in the NFL. Like, if some guy leaves a network, there has to be an open spot at Fox or ESPN or CBS. Like, if Greg Olson says, you know what, they're bringing in Tom Brady, I'm out of here. He's done a great job with Kevin Burkhardt on Fox, but is there a lead team on another network that's available? No, because they got Romo and Nance, they got Mike Tirico. There's no real spot. So I got to ask, is there a spot for Russell Wilson? And you got to hit a point in your career, everyone hits a point where they're like, well, what is my value? What am I? Like Jimmy Garoppolo got $20-something million for the Raiders. That went away real quick. Is he in that range? Like, is Russ a $20 million quarterback?
I think that's what Jason was maybe alluding to in terms of maybe a spot for Russell Wilson, but you just bring it up. Isn't it almost the exact situation of a quarterback not being wanted somewhere and not being wanted to stick around, so then the Raiders are going to pick him up and he's supposed to be good for them? Like, if you're a Raiders fan...
Deja vu.
Yeah, seriously. That's the tricky thing about it. And when I was talking about Mitchell Trubisky, by no means do I think Russell Wilson is going to be a backup quarterback. I think he will start somewhere in the National Football League in week 1 of the 2024 season. But there is just this negativity around you. And to Jason's point, he can't get away from himself. In reading, there was a statement that was put out by the Broncos about the release, and then Russell Wilson ended up releasing his. And it's funny because it's on the heels of Jason Kelce retiring today, where Kelce spoke for, gosh, I don't know. I watched for 25 minutes at home and had to leave. Like that's how long it was. And he was going like almost year by year in naming people. Russell Wilson released a statement naming a bunch of people, didn't mention Sean Payton, didn't mention Nathaniel Hackett, didn't mention any of that. But like made specific references to Cortland Sutton or Garrett Bowles and Javonte Williams. And it's a nice touch, but it's also Russell Wilson. So you're like, okay, is he just using those guys to make his
I'm a team guy?
Yeah, exactly. Look at like these are my guys. Like he probably will miss them, but it's like you can't take anything he says serious. You couldn't take it 2 weeks ago when he spoke with Brandon Marshall and said that he wanted to win 2 more Super Bowls.
Dan Beyer, you're a Seahawks fan.
Yeah.
I'm a Niners fan, as you know. There were years I feared that team. More the defense, but this is a guy that won a Super Bowl. He was one Marshawn Lynch run away, from winning back-to-back Super Bowls. Mm-hmm. So he does have the resume, but it's sort of, I don't know if the skill set diminished. And there's also the layer of this where every team in the NFL is constantly looking for that next gem. Like, we need to get our Mahomes. Like Houston feels like, we got C.J. Stroud. We got it. Then you look at a guy like Baker Mayfield, who people sort of gave up on. Had a nice year in Tampa.
Yeah,
brought him to
nice.
brought him to the playoffs. Is there going to be a team that says, listen, we're not going to get Caleb Williams, and we're not going to get a top guy. Our best bet is Russell Wilson, and we think we might be able to win with this guy. Is everyone on board with maybe Russ could help someone win?
Well, yeah, to your point, there's only so many spots, though, that there are. And there are some that are better than others. And the Raiders have other decisions to make, what their backfield's going to look like next year. The Steelers seem to kind of have pieces in place, but I don't know if it's any better than what the Raiders have. At least offensively. It may sound crazy, but I feel that's true. The Steelers have a strength on defense. Maybe that's what Russell needs. He needs the defense to take on more of a load like it was in Seattle. Like those are the questions in terms of where he's going to go, but I
have an answer for
I think
you
everybody
about
would
his
probably
value,
want to go to Atlanta because of the weapons that they have there if you're a quarterback. But maybe Atlanta's like, well, we don't. Again, with the little stench that's on Russell Wilson and him being him, maybe it just doesn't work out that way, and it doesn't see the fit. I don't know if there's a perfect fit anywhere, considering how bad it ended. There may be a perfect fit for Russell Wilson, but I don't know if there's a perfect fit for an organization in bringing him in.
Yeah. They're in an interesting spot. What do you got, Jay Stu?
Back to your question about how is he valued? Who values him and at what rate and why? But in your radio analogy, every once in a while you'll see that like kind of big top name guy get fired, and he's kind of made his run. He's kind of a has-been. And then you see like a major network sign him. And the point is, as long as one person in one organization believes in you, that is what your value is.
True.
It could be a head scratcher to everybody else in the industry, but maybe one guy in that organization was like, man, that guy was something else. I used to go to sleep listening to him, and he's, that's not a great compliment.
No,
but anyways, that's my point.
It does take just one person of power in any industry. Covino and I always say that. Like, all it takes is a couple important people, men or women that run things, to believe in you. That's all you really need. And Rush just needs one GM, one owner out there to say, let's take a shot on this guy. What do we have to lose? Not $30 to $50 million a year, but certainly not chump change. Again, like, Dan, what is his value? I don't think anyone really knows.
And this is also what makes it so crazy when you think of his happening. I don't think there's a radio analogy here, but Russell Wilson was traded because the Seahawks didn't want to give him the new contract.
Yeah.
They didn't want to pay him $50 million a year. And I also think that they saw some decline in his play where they were like, okay, because they didn't have to trade him at that point. They could have waited another year, but it seemed like things were lining up, and maybe there was a decline in his play after he was injured. It's not that the Broncos acquired Russell Wilson. It's that they gave him the contract that he wanted that put them in this situation. So while they were tied together, like Denver wasn't going to give up the boatload of picks that they gave up and not sign him. They weren't going to just let him hit free agency. Like there was always the understanding of, that he was going to get that long-term deal. But in the end, like you can't fault Denver for thinking, to your point that you started off, like we're a quarterback away. We're one player away from doing this.
Yep.
Let's go out and get him. What's now hampered them is they found out pretty quickly that he's not, is that they had to make the commitment to him with this massive deal, which now forces them to spread their $85 million of dead cap money over 2 seasons. And avoided paying him $37 million in guarantees by just letting him go.
I think the fit in Denver, you could say that Russ does a lot of things that, maybe people don't love, but that fit in Denver, maybe it was, Hackett, then Sean Payton, it did him no favors. Like, he went into that. You rewind a couple years. Our opinions changed real quick. He was the answer Denver was looking for. Remember, it was, man, their defense is so good. They're a quarterback away from maybe winning a Super Bowl. There are people on this network. I'm pretty sure Colin Cowherd's pick for the Super Bowl was the Broncos with Russell Wilson 2 years ago.
And he was going to win the MVP.
Yeah.
That's a fact.
That was the narrative on this network, other networks. Everyone's like, Russell Wilson, new home, Denver, let's go. And it didn't work out, but who's to say? Listen, he's getting older, not the player he was. But what if he is in Atlanta? You're right. I know that's not a team I'm hearing. I'm hearing like the Vikings and the Steelers, but Atlanta, a team with weapons, what if he was able to run that? What if he was able to take a team in a mediocre division to the playoffs again? Are we going to be talking about, man, Russell Wilson's back, just had to find his fit?
Well, if he would go there and doesn't get it done, then it's surely over.
Then it's
with.
over.
Then it's absolutely.
It's like a fighter when they lose a few fights in a row. You're like, you're a fight away from like not making the pay-per-view anymore.
Yeah.
You can't lose too many main events in a row.
There is. The longer you stick around, how much does it hurt a Hall of Fame candidacy? I don't think that he's a Hall of Fame quarterback, but I think we'd be naive to say that there are some people that think that he is. Like when you look at him and you look at his career, and again, I am a glass half empty guy. So when I look at my favorite teams, if we're talking about the Seahawks, I'll find more negatives than I do positives. Maybe that's the type of fan that I am. But there are people who feel that with the Super Bowl, with what he has done, that he's a Hall of Fame candidate quarterback. But if he has another bad season, how can you have 3 stinkers of a season, towards the end of your career and then be considered a Hall of Fame quarterback when they're questioning if you were even a main part of a Super Bowl and then what you did when the team lost its key defensive players? It's such a, unique, examination of a guy who, by the way, that level of guy does not become available in the NFL anymore, which made Denver a whole other reason of why they felt that they needed to go after him. How often does someone like, and I'm using air quotes, Russell Wilson become available for you to acquire?
Dude, you just made me think of a whole separate angle to this, which is, like I said, we're all looking, every team, every fan base is waiting for their Mahomes to work out. Even Josh Allen. Remember the speculation when he lost to the playoffs, like maybe the Bills move on from Josh Allen? Everyone's just so anxious to get the guy that's going to get him a Super Bowl.
Did you see that video, by the way, over the weekend, with that viral video of the, for whatever reason, somebody found the Bills fans reacting to the draft pick of Josh Allen?
Dude, I love that stuff so much because it just proves that all of us fans, broadcasters, no one knows everything.
We don't know anything.
All those fans, I saw the same thing you saw. It was in 2018. All the Bills fans were like, Josh Allen, son of a... Like, they were so mad. And it goes along with a clip we played here on COVINO Rich a couple weeks ago. The Patrick Mahomes reaction when the Chiefs drafted him, like, he's got bad footwork. This is a bad pick. Why would they go with Mahomes? No one knows. But I do think it's an interesting thought. We're always looking for the next best thing, right? We always are. We need the guy. Isn't there something to be said about there's only one team that wins, and the goal for most teams is probably just to compete, maybe make the playoffs, get your fans excited, fill the stadium? Like your team. You brought up your Seahawks. We could all agree Geno Smith is not winning a Super Bowl. But you know what he did? Brought some excitement, playoff runs, likable guy. In fact, one of the most likable guys in the league. Seattle at least knows, they're 500 or better. Not every team. This is, McFly, not every team is going to have a Super Bowl run every year. So the same way people are like, what should Tampa do with Baker Mayfield? I don't know, run it back?
Yeah.
You play 500 or better, you always have a shot. But what's the alternative? Every year or so, just scrap the team if you don't have the guy? Out of the 32 teams, they always say, like, who would not move their quarterback no matter what? And it's only usually, like, under 10. There's 20 teams at all times that would move off of their guy. They would
Sure.
move off of that. In fact, Brock Purdy had a hell of a year last year. And remember in the offseason, they were speculating, can we get Tom Brady out of retirement? Everyone's on the hot seat. Unless your name is Patrick Mahomes, maybe Burrow, Josh Allen. There's a couple guys. Deshaun Watson. Other than a handful of guys, Lamar Jackson, your team would upgrade in a second. It's like dating in 2024. You ever see your friends, they think some girl likes them, they get ghosted? Because they upgrade. The girl finds some hot dude with abs at the gym. Swipe, swipe. Essentially, teams are just swiping, and they're never satisfied.
Look at, you mentioned Baker Mayfield, but what about Baker Mayfield's tenure with the Browns? You know, it was the first overall pick, there to bring juice to an organization that had won, one game over a 2-year span, comes in, provides that juice, then ends up leading them to the playoffs in a playoff victory.
Dude.
And the next thing you know, 2 years later, he's suiting up for the Rams on a random Thursday night game against the Raiders after a stop in Carolina because they couldn't wait to kick him to the curb in Cleveland. Like there's to that point of what have you done for me lately? You know, Baker Mayfield's tenure in Cleveland is a perfect example. And now when you look at Cleveland's situation, they're loving Joe Flacco, but how much would they have wanted Baker Mayfield back instead of giving the war chest that they did to the Houston Texans?
You're so right. That's a great example of us not really knowing as fans or taking people for granted. They always say it with presidents, right? Like you can't really judge someone's presidency until years and years later. Baker Mayfield's tenure in Cleveland, that was a team that was winning a game a year. 2 games. They were awful. Baker Mayfield brought excitement. He brought wins. And they kicked him to the curb. The minute the hotter chick at the time, Deshaun Watson, they were so quick to be like, yo, later, my guy. Take a back seat. And it's hard to defend Baker Mayfield, but he's a more humble, fun version of Baker Mayfield these days. But everyone's looking for their next guy. And will there be a team that says, well, we're not going to get Caleb Williams, so maybe, like if the Steelers got Russell Wilson, and let's say he worked out with Tomlin in the system, they got a good defense, what if they won 11, 12 games, made a playoff run? Is that a failure? I guess
No.
If you say Super Bowl or bust, then everyone's a failure.
Yeah. No, you're right. But the Steelers, again, a team that prides itself on Super Bowl victories.
Yeah.
I think for what the Steelers have, if Russell Wilson was able to do that, it would be a success. But, yeah, it's – I don't know. I don't know if it would happen in Pittsburgh.
Look at the NBA. Not to switch sports, but there's teams with marquee names. You're telling me if they don't win the NBA Finals, the organization looks at it as a fail? They might from a competitive nature, but you fill in the seats. You got some marquee players like Dallas. Luka, Kyrie, they got names. They fill up the stadium. We talked about the other day, one of the best attendances in the NBA. Mark Cuban wants to win. But do you call those seasons failures if they make the playoffs and get bumped? Not always.
No. I think if you're a Buffalo Bills fan, you look back at those 4 years, would you trade those 4 years just to have one Super Bowl? And it may seem on the surface like, well, yeah, of course, because you won it all. But think of all the joy that you got in watching Jim Kelly and Thurman Thomas and Bruce Smith, and I know that there was heartache at the end of it.
Well, I recently dealt with this, Dan. This is one of my stages of 49ers grief, by the way. I've now come to terms with the fact that they lost the Super Bowl. But when people say, how do you feel about it? You bummed? You went to the Super Bowl, you were in Vegas, your team lost in overtime. I say, you know what? They lost on the last play of the game, and then the season was over. So I didn't have to watch anything after that.
Sure.
The 49ers had a 99.9% successful season except for that last play. Mm-hmm. They were winning until that last play. Not every team's going to win. I know. Newsflash. Back in the day, you'd be happy if your team was over 500. Now everyone wants the superstar, and not everyone gets them. It's true. It's like you see a lot of your single friends. Oh, what are they waiting for? You ever see a single friend? Your friend's, not in the best shape, not really, not a looker, doesn't really have a lot of money, and he's like, thinks he deserves a woman that looks like Sydney Sweeney. Not happening, bro. Don't hold off for Sydney Sweeney. Go out with the average girl. I promise you, you're not getting Sydney Sweeney. Every team in the NFL is not getting a Patrick Mahomes. That's what it is.
Did we see any Sydney Sweeney on our social media this weekend? I missed it. Was she anywhere?
Mike, when she said farewell at the end of SNL, was she bouncing on purpose, Jay Still?
Of course.
Was she like, oh my God, bye, everybody?
That had to be. She knows what she's working.
My wife looked at me. She's like, why is your head bouncing up and down? I'm like, I'm just following along, honey. Just following. Lorena, you feeling me on this or what? Everyone
I just can't get the image out of Tigger out of my head right now.
bouncing her.
Yeah.
Think about it. In life, Lorena, everyone's always looking for the upgrade.
100%. No, you can ask people. They'll have 2 dates planned, and if they'll have hopefully the hotter one that doesn't bail, and if they don't, then they'll ditch the other girl. I mean, it's same in every aspect.
So don't wait for those Sydney Sweeney, just go for what you could attain.